Welcome to From the VC's Bookshelf, a podcast from TBR, the College System of Tennessee, the state's largest higher education system. In this series, we examine how we might re-envision the work we do and how we work together as we move into a post-pandemic world. Please join our host, Dr. Heidi Lemming, Vice Chancellor for Student Success, as she leads a live discussion with industry experts and leaders throughout our system.
We're excited to have our final podcast in this series for the spring 2023 on themes from the book Failing Forward in Student Affairs, Using Missteps to Guide Next Steps, edited by Lisa Endersby. So this book is a compilation of personal stories from higher education practitioners, but all the stories have a common theme in that the authors open up about professional failure. So in this podcast, we've been interviewing faculty and staff across the TBR system to talk about their personal failures, how they define failure, and then what they've learned from that experience. As the author Endersby states, the focus is on failure not as an action, but rather as an emotion, an identity, and a place where everyone seems to find themselves returning to over and over again. So I'm excited today, again, to wrap up our podcast series with an interview with Laura Moran, who works at Nashville State Community College. She began her passion for higher education as a recruiter and transitioned to the Director of Admissions and Recruiting. She's now the Executive Director of Enrollment Services, which has oversight of admissions and records, the Welcome Center, and career services and testing. She graduated from Lipscomb in 2003 as a marketing major and completed her MBA at MTSU in 2014. During her time at Nashville State, she's been able to participate in many initiatives, including the launch of Tennessee Reconnect and Tennessee Promise, Nashville Grad, Achieving the Dream, Better Together, and serves as a team member for the Nashville Talent Hub. She enjoys being a part of changing the trajectory of students' lives and making educational opportunities available for all. She and her husband have 3 dogs, love to travel, hike, go to concerts, and spend time outdoors. And it's been my pleasure to really get to know her a lot better this last year because she was in the CTLI program with me. That's a program sponsored by SCORE.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and so I guess the danger in getting to know me well is that you're going to be asked to do a podcast.
That was the danger, yes. But I'm very grateful for the opportunity for you inviting me.
Thank you. So really excited to just hear more from Laura about her personal story. And one of the things that I always start every podcast with is just opportunity for the person to share a little bit more about themselves. So I gave a bio, but there's always a lot more there about your personal journeys. So I just want to give you a space to do that.
For sure. Again, thank you for inviting me. I always describe myself as a Kentucky girl at heart. I grew up in Kentucky on a chicken farm, no less, with 33,000 chickens. So a real big chicken farm.
Wow, yeah.
So, growing up on a farm has kind of shaped my work ethic somewhat. I moved to Nashville to come to Lipscomb, and I never left. I have loved this city. I've just love being here, and I love the community. And basically, I sort of landed into the career into higher education, and I've found a true passion for my job and my work and helping students. My husband and I, that's actually where we met. We met at work. Okay. He was the Director of Financial Aid, and I was the Director of Admissions. So we were kind of the power couple on campus for a period of time until he's actually now at TSAC. But, we have 3 dogs. I'm a crazy dog lady. I would have more if he would allow it, but he says no to that. But anyways, that's me pretty much summed up.
Okay. And so you really got into higher education because of what? Like, what were you doing at Lipscomb that maybe led you there?
So nothing, to be quite honest. My undergrad was in marketing, and so I had graduated from college and thought I was going to be this high-power marketing executive, advertising executive, something like that. Started looking into the field, looking at job opportunities, and couldn't really find anything that I was truly interested in. So I kept looking for jobs. What's something that's somewhat related to marketing where I could use my background? And I came across this ad for Nashville State as a coordinator of recruitment. And I thought, that might kind of be in line with, my goals and the things that I've learned. Mm-hmm. So I applied for that job. I got the job. And really, I just landed in it. I was trying to find some alignment with what I knew, and it was the perfect fit. Yeah. I have been at Nashville State for over 18 years now. I love our institution and the work that we do, and I believe that we really do make an impact in our community.
Yeah. So many people that I talk to in higher education, particularly on the student affairs side of the house with admissions and enrollment kind of functions, never thought that was a career possibility, so kind of fell into it in some way. But your marketing experience directly aligns with that. I mean, hey, I was a mass comm major in undergrad, and I'm doing a podcast series now, right?
It weaves and works itself out.
I mean, and you can use some of those skills. I tell students, just because you have a particular degree doesn't mean you can't use those in a variety of professions, right?
Exactly.
That's good. All right. Well, so again, the theme of the book is about failing forward. Really like the clever title of that, obviously, because it's about how we just lean into our missteps, right?
Absolutely.
How would you define the word failure? Because that's different for everyone that I've interviewed, and I think that's an important context before we get into your personal story.
Absolutely. So, a long time ago, failing used to be not winning, it's losing, it's getting the wrong answer. It's the opposite of successful, right? We have such a negative connotation around the word failure. But over time, my viewpoint of what failure is has truly changed. And I will tell you a story that I heard from Scott Hamill, who was Olympic figure skater. He was talking to his son, who was starting to play hockey. And the son was biggest Preds fan, loves hockey. And he was not a very good player. Mm-hmm. So by the second game that they had, he was getting very discouraged. And he said, Dad, I'm not sure about this. I don't think I can do it. And so Scott Hamill asked him, he said, well, I understand what you're saying, but what did you learn today? What did you figure out because you lost? And he said, well, I figured out I was skating a little bit faster. And he listed, several different things that he had observed about his performance. And Scott Hamill said, well, what would you have learned today if you had won? And his son said, probably nothing. And so I think the point that I'm trying to drive here is that just because we quote unquote fail, there's an opportunity for us to learn and to grow from that experience. And how will we ever improve ourselves if we're always perfect or we're always winning, so to speak?
Right.
So I think that that's a really good example of it's okay to not always be right. And trust me, I have had my fair share of battling with that obsession for perfection. So just giving some grace and knowing that there's an opportunity to learn something when it doesn't work out the way you intended.
Right. Okay. So let's get into it. It happens to everyone. We accidentally do something that we didn't intend to do or slip up. Those are kind of easy foibles sometimes that we can just apologize for. But as you reflect back over your life and career, can you think of a more consequential mistake that maybe you make? The author calls them the mistakes that change you forever. Do you have an example of that you would feel comfortable sharing and maybe what you learned from that?
Yes. So I would start out by saying that I didn't realize that it was a mistake, and there was some sort of awareness that was brought. So we had at Nashville State an opportunity to do a training session through the Poverty Institute, and it's Donna Beagle is the person that runs that. And so it's really informing practitioners about, she calls it the war zone of poverty. And through that, you learn lots of different things. But the thing that made the biggest impact on me is that people that live in poverty, there's a difference in the way that we receive information. So people that live in poverty typically have more of an oral culture. That's the way they receive information, and the way information sticks is orally, through storytelling, through visuals, things like that. In higher ed, we have a print culture. Everything we write, we're writing it out. We've got all the steps. We're telling students to read these things, do these things. And I can remember being so frustrated thinking, we are spelling everything out for students. Why can they not follow these instructions? I feel like we're making it so clear. But after I went through the Poverty Institute, I was like, oh my gosh, we're doing it wrong. This is not how we should be communicating. We need to actually have lots of different ways that we're communicating information to our students, whether it's through videos, through visual graphics, things like that, so that we're not depending on students to read every single sentence and figure out and interpret the information. So it wasn't necessarily a known mistake. It was just more of an awareness of, wow, like I think we have been failing our students by not providing this information in a different manner.
Yeah. Well, gosh, there's probably a lot of examples like that in higher ed right now, because we're all digging into figuring out better ways that we can support different student types, right? And the research that people are doing about this, right? So that we can figure out better ways to communicate with different types of students or support different types of students.
Right.
People are really leaning into that. So all of us probably can say, I had an aha moment about how I need to do my work differently as a result of some of this research that's now coming to light.
For sure. And it's honestly, we don't have it perfect. It's always evolving, and we have our students review the materials and the letters and the things that we send out. Again, we still don't have it right. We're constantly changing it to try to adjust that message so that students can have access without barriers, right?
Yeah. Well, of course, the fun and challenging thing about any kind of marketing is that your demographic does change. So like now you're dealing with students who were impacted by COVID, right? And they're coming to us. And how do you message things differently, maybe even to that audience, than someone who's an adult, or more of a traditional adult, I guess you'd say, right?
Yes. So, with a more traditional population, it's interesting because our adults are wanting to take more of their classes online. They want to be more virtual. And we're finding that the students that have lived through COVID, through high school years, they want to be more in person. And so we have to showcase our flexibility and all of the different options that we have as a college so that you can find that you fit in there however you want to take classes.
Right. So trying to show that you can be everything and
everything to everyone. Yes.
That's a fun time.
Absolutely.
Trying to figure that out. Well, so I think, again, to your personal experience and your personal definition of failure, and how does that help you in your role working with students? So we talk about like the differences that students all have and how they're receiving communication. I mean, everyone's going to have their different way that they interpret communication and that sort of thing. So I guess talk about how you lean into your personal experiences in working with students.
Sure. I try not to think about or use the word failure. I think that we're constantly changing things and adjusting to make it better. So, for example, my example with just, changing our communications and having students review that. I don't say that we failed at doing that. I say that we actually just adjusted, right? Something is not working, so let's change at least one thing and try to do something a little bit different to improve it. And it's more of kind of a positive spin on how you approach it versus that I've failed, this isn't working sort of thing. We also, another example with our purge process, the deadline for students to pay for their classes, that was not working. And we were, our students, we were losing them and we would have to re-enroll them. And there was a whole lot of work and rework. And so we just really evaluated that process. We talked to students and asked for their opinion. And then we made a couple of adjustments. We didn't know if it was going to work. We just kind of took a leap of faith and said, let's try this. We have to change something. So let's just try to change one thing. And then we did, and it's actually working better now. So
yeah. And you never know if it is going to work out, right? So you just
Right.
have to be flexible to go ahead and pivot.
Absolutely.
Everything's a big experiment.
It is. Life is a big experiment. That's a good way to say it, because it is trial and error.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sometimes failing forward also can be an act of serendipity, right? So we talked about how you just kind of fell into the profession working in higher education. Maybe that was serendipity. I don't know.
It absolutely. That's the perfect example right there of just kind of landing in your career and finding your path. I feel very fortunate because, I've had friends throughout my life that they're working in jobs where they feel like, they're in a grind and there's not meaning or passion or fulfillment from it. And so I'm very grateful that when I come to work every day that I feel like I'm doing something for someone else. And I think that's also just sort of the type of person I am. I need to feel like I'm helping other people in my job. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Well, and, when we're thinking again about working with students, having them find their purpose, that can be a little bit of a challenge. I think definitely we see this with a lot of our students maybe, and that's why they don't stick with it, is they just don't make the connection between what they're learning and what they want to do.
Absolutely. I remember my first year of college. In my head, I thought I was going to be a chiropractor, and I am not a math and science person, but I was dead set that was what I wanted to be. I took my first set of science classes and said, yes, this is not for me. I will not be doing this. So, you have to try something and make an attempt to discover if it's going to work for you or not. And you just have to be open and somewhat vulnerable to the chance that it may not work out. And if it doesn't, it's okay. That next best opportunity is going to follow up right behind it.
Yeah. So again, not seeing that as a failure.
Right.
I hate hearing I'm not a math person. It's like, no, it's just maybe it's the type of math that you took.
Exactly. But I remember that was like the first C I'd ever gotten was in a science class in college, and I felt awful about it. Mm-hmm. So, maybe if I had stuck with it, maybe I was so discouraged by that. That's one of the reasons why I went off of that path. But, I'm glad I landed where I did.
Yeah, it led you to something else. Again, one of the contributors of the book mentions that failure is like a lot of other value-based constructs and that it's intersectional. So it's social, cultural, deeply personal. So thinking back on how you worked through that, any failures, do you see that intersectionality in terms of how you interpreted what was going on and ultimately how you dealt with that situation? So you grew up on a farm, for example. So did that influence? Did the chickens influence something?
Oh my goodness, the chickens! I mean, it definitely influenced my work ethic. That's for sure, because we were always, there was always something to be done. But when I think about this question and think about intersectionality, I also think about mental health and my own personal mental health. In 2013, I lost my father. I also got engaged and married that year, so it was a very bittersweet year. And then the following year, I just felt like I wasn't progressing, like I was sort of stuck in a rut. And so, I went and saw someone when I was clinically diagnosed with depression. And I remember when she said that to me, I went out to my car and I cried. And I cried because I felt like I wasn't succeeding in life, that I was failing in my own life, that, this is what depression is. Like I'm a quote unquote failure. And that is just not true. And, I hope that people, I don't think the depression was a failure, but I certainly felt that sense of it.
Right.
And had to do a lot of work to get out of that mindset. So, it's the mental health part is a real tough piece for people, especially now, especially coming out of COVID. And it's something that we don't talk about a lot. But I do think, it's important to address that, to examine it, to look at it, and then use the resources that are available as far as whether it's, medication, therapy, what have you.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, because I think that's important for a lot of our listeners in this day and age to hear, is that others struggle with different types of mental illness or like depression or other things, but that's normal. It's normalized in some way by hearing the stories from others, right? And
For sure.
Yes, that can affect your perception of this idea of failure, right?
Correct.
Because you just kind of start spiraling
Yes.
in your own thoughts.
And I did. I kept thinking, gosh, I get up every day. I go to work. I'm doing all these things that I was checking the box that I thought was successful, and it really challenged the way that I thought about life, honestly.
Well, and from what you've described as your background, working on a farm and the work ethic, you probably, I'm kind of speculating here, but I grew up in the Midwest. We kind of have a similar farming mentality, and It's like the mentality is if you work hard, you will be successful. Exactly. So if you somehow didn't work hard enough or something, it's like, but that's not always they're not always correlated.
Exactly. You have to kind of untangle those two things.
Right.
So
because you're just raised to think that hard work equals success in every situation, and that's just not true.
It's just not always true.
Right. Well, again, one of the authors reminds us that those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So, again, thinking about some of the choices that we make and reflecting back on your personal history and things, is there something that you're like, I'm glad that I remembered X mistake because then later I didn't repeat it, or
I don't know that I have a specific example of that, but I will tell you how I try to combat those things.
Okay.
And that is with a trusted group of friends and support network. Mm-hmm. I have a core group of friends that I lean on for a lot of different things, and also my husband too. But it's so important to have people that will give you good, valuable, honest feedback and can be direct with you, and you have this no judgment zone, right? Like I need to spill all and tell you everything, and I need your honest feedback. And I think it's so important to have at least 3 to 5 of those people in your life that can help you from preventing, remember when this happened 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Like this is what happened. Like, let's talk through that.
Yeah.
So just having someone to bounce those ideas off of has really been valuable for me. And I don't know what I would do without my support group.
Yeah, that's great. Because I think, again, people don't think about how the network helps you navigate.
Sure. The hard part of that, though, is you have to be vulnerable, right? So I think that fear of failure, we carry a lot of shame with that. Mm-hmm. We want to hide. We don't want people to see us. But you really do have to open up to people. And I think there's a lot of freedom in that. It's very freeing to have people to talk to about your experiences that are not going to go tell other people or share it or judge you for those types of things. So that network is huge.
Yeah, that's good too. All right. Was there some time when you felt you didn't push yourself to take a risk because you were fearing failure?
I know that there has been examples. I feel very fortunate that I work at an institution that encourages failure, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I will never forget, we were doing like our banner conversion. And
now for listeners, they're not going to know what that is.
So this was our student information system.
Yeah.
So we were doing all kinds of work with upgrading our student information system.
Okay.
And it was a lot of work, let me just tell you. And so I felt like there was something that I had messed up on, and I stewed on it for a little while, and then I eventually went to my supervisor and talked it through with her. And she said, it's okay. Like, mistakes happen. It's okay. And she has on her desk this giant rubber eraser, and it says 4 big mistakes. And she showed that to me, and she said, I keep this here as a reminder because we're not perfect. We're not always going to get it right. And that has just always stayed with me. Like, she has always encouraged us that if we mess up, it's okay. We're going to be supported. And that's how we lead to innovation, right? We have to go through and change and challenge things to figure out what works.
Yeah.
So I'm very thankful for having a supervisor that has been so supportive.
Well, and the advantage to you being part of a system is that you also then can share those lessons learned with others in the hopes that they can avoid
For sure.
those too. So within your community of fellow admissions, records staff at other TBR institutions, y'all meet, and I know that you do this, right? I've been on the calls where you're sharing lessons with each other so that big mistakes don't necessarily have to happen to everybody.
And it goes back to that trusted network, right? So we, our admissions and records group, we all really depend on each other. And we can ask the questions and say, I've been doing it this way. Is that the right way to do it? And it's okay if it's not. We can, adjust and change. So again, that network.
Yeah. And kudos to your supervisor, because not everybody has a supervisor
I'm
like that.
very lucky. I am very, very lucky that our institution really does foster that, pushing yourself and, just trying things. We have to try things, and they may not work out, and that's okay.
Yeah.
When we set goals for, our individual departments, and, we're just trying to achieve something. It may not actually be achievable, or we may not meet that goal, but we tried, and we reflect on it, and we adjust.
Yeah. Well, and some stuff's just not within your control.
Correct. Like COVID, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then you're like, what are we going to do?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Well, so we're getting to our final minutes together. But I always like to give an opportunity for the folks I'm interviewing to give final words of wisdom, right? So as we think about this topic of failure or failing forward, what do you want to impart with our listeners?
I would say to embrace the failure, to gather around your trusted network, to really look at and examine and kind of shift failure a little bit so that you can say, what can I learn from this? How can I improve? How can I move forward? And so you never know what that next opportunity is going to be on the other side of whatever that quote unquote failure is, but just to persevere and stick with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Laura, and your insights and reflections. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And have a good rest of your summer.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this edition of From the VC's Bookshelf, brought to you by TBR, the College System of Tennessee, powering the state's economy and changing the lives of thousands of graduates, starting successful careers each year. To learn more about upcoming book selections or to register to attend discussions live, visit tbr.edu/bookshelf.